I guess we can start. I see the number of participants is increasing. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this online debate, which is co-organized by FSR and Bruegel. Today, we are going to discuss a very timely and important topic. We gave a sort of provocative title to today's online debate: EU getting rid of Russian energy addiction, when and why and how. Well, obviously, we all know we are about almost 1 month has already passed after the shocking invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the start of a conflict which is having dramatic consequences, of course, first of all, for the Ukrainian people at all levels, but is also posing some sort of threat to Europe, to the existing relations between Europe and Russia. And today we are going to address the big questions that are now being debated at a high level in Europe, particularly concerning the energy side, the energy aspects of this EU-Russia relations. We know that there was an informal meeting in Versailles of the European Council on 10th and 11th of March, at which the European leaders agreed to phase out dependency on Russian gas, oil, and coal imports as soon as possible. And we have a proposal called Repower EU, published by the European Commission on 8th of March, which attempts to provide some recipe on how to make Europe becoming more independent from Russia energy-wise, and has some very ambitious targets for that. The European Council is also meeting today, so we will know soon the outcome. And we thought it would be very timely to organize this debate with real experts who can give us some interesting insights and provide perspectives on the whole such a complex situation. My name is Ilaria Conti. I am the responsible for the gas, decarbonization, and hydrogen area of the Florence School of Regulation, and we are organizing this debate together with Professor Jean-Michel Glachant, you see here. We will have two sessions today. I'm going to moderate the first one, and I'm going to introduce you the speakers in a second. The debate will be structured this way. We will have a first panel which will discuss how is it possible, when will it be possible to do without Russian energy supply. And in the second, we will explore a more, let's say, geopolitical dimension and how the impact of this ongoing conflict, what's the impact is going to be on particular some regions in Europe. Along the debate, you will be invited to ask questions, so please feel free to write your questions in the chat box, because we will devote some time to Q&As to our speakers. This said, I'm going to introduce the first two speakers for today. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Georg Zachmann, Senior Fellow at Bruegel since 2009. He's been working on energy and climate policy as a pillar there of energy and climate policy research. He previously worked at the German Ministry of Finance, at the German Institute for Economic Research in Berlin, and for the think tank Larsen in Paris. Georg, you're very welcome. Very, very pleased to have you here. Hello. And after Georg, we will have the pleasure of listening to Professor Jean Pisani-Ferry, co-founder, former director, and currently fellow at Bruegel, with which I repeat, we co-organized this event. He's also senior professor at Sciences Po Paris, at RSCAS School of Governance, and of course also at the European University Institute, where he holds the Tommaso Padoa-Schioppa chairmanship. And Professor Pisani-Ferry was Commissioner General of France Strategy, the Ideas Lab of the French government, and he served also as advisor for the French Ministry of Finance and for the Commission, among others. Very welcome, Professor Ferry.
Thank you very much. It's a great initiative that you took together with Bruegel to have this workshop.
very pleased to have you here and to cooperate with Bruegel on this. We think it's a timely debate. So without further ado, I would now give the floor to Georg for the first intervention. You will have about 12-13 minutes, so we have also time for some questions. Thank you very much, Georg.
Yes, thanks a lot, Ilaria, and yes, thanks a lot for the invitation and for the initiative. It's great to speak here together with two of my former bosses, Jean and Jean-Michel. So now I want to start a bit out on a bit broader picture in order to explain to you why I think that this is important, what we talk about, and that this is not going to be a small minor issue that we are discussing. So the Russian invasion a month ago was really a dark historic moment, and it was really a historic moment in the sense of summer 1914, this order of magnitude in my view. This is not going to be a regional conflict. It is really kind of, it's a fight over main principles of international relations that we are seeing here. Invading a country to annex territory has not happened at that scale since the founding of the United Nations. So it's really, I mean, we are coming to a different world. And with this very moment, we all have become significantly poorer. So we will have to invest in guns instead of butter. We will have a significant shock to global trade. People will do much more inward looking. Our energy relations with each other are going to be much more focused on resilience and much less focused on competitiveness and cost. So that all, I mean, we have to tell it to our policymakers, we are not going to go back before January or in the world of January 2022. We are in a new world, and it's not a nicer world. It's a worse world than the one we were before. So don't kind of, we all want to revert to our old mean of the times before, but that's not going to happen. We have to accept the new reality. The energy world has changed fast, and it will continue to change very fast in the weeks and months to come. And the faster we understand the direction in which we are going, the more forward-looking we can act. So many actors are still delusional in my country, in other countries, thinking about we can just go back to a world where we import 50% of our gas from Russia. That's not going to happen. In the short term, Europe cannot be in a position of weakness towards Russia in this situation. We cannot afford to be blackmailed by Russia now with this little hat trick by Putin on paying in rubles or anything else, that they are essentially able to blackmail us in any sort of negotiations over the future of Central Europe. It would be a huge strategic long-term mistake if Europe would have to sign any agreement that it doesn't want to, because it is afraid of not being able to heat its schools and kindergartens next winter. So we have to be prepared, and we need to move into crisis mode immediately. And we are not yet there. I repeat, many people are still delusional about what has happened. Now, we need to demonstrate that we can survive next winters without Russian gas, and we can manage, and we will manage if Europeans stand together on that. And if we organize well, then the short-term cost of that will also be manageable. I think the cost of getting rid of Russian energy are not going to be in the 2 digits of GDP. It's single digits and maybe even small single digits. But it requires us to kind of find good solutions in working together on that. And if we manage well and have a bit of a longer term perspective, there might even be a few long-term benefits of the current crisis in catalyzing things that we didn't manage to do before, but that we always knew were a good idea to do. For oil and coal, I'm less worried. I mean, these are global, relatively liquid markets. There are suppliers, and overall, the shock that Europe will experience will be a shared shock across the world. So kind of the shortfall of Russian oil and coal to the European market will be experienced by everybody. It will be essentially buffered by emerging markets, by other OECD markets. So that will be a shared cost, and therefore the effect should be relatively manageable. On the natural gas side, the effects will be much stronger because we are quite dependent on Russian natural gas. About 40% of our natural gas last year came from Russia. For some countries, the exposure is even higher. Now, I don't want to go into the numbers and describe all the different technical options that we are seeing here. You can find those in our blog post and in the material that is essentially appearing daily now on what we can do. And I kind of just can refer to Barack Obama and saying it's an all of the above approach. I mean, we need everything. We need all the different solutions. It's not one single silver bullet, but we need kind of to pull different solutions in different countries from different sectors together. And the challenge will be more how to organize that in a way that kind of we keep our unity and that we don't do it in a too inefficient way. Now, what I want to do is to focus on some elements of potential solutions and less on the technical side, more on the institutional side. So the first thing is member states need to explore which legal flexibilities they have to unlock their potential. That means environmental regulation that prevents certain coal from being burned in certain coal-fired power plants, but we might not have the luxury of doing that now. That means bringing back some lignite-fired power plants from the German grid reserves in Germany. Discussing about whether it is possible and how quickly it is possible to bring back some of the nuclear plants, or at least to keep those plants that are online running a bit longer. Thinking about how we can compensate the Dutch for producing more of their natural gas, even though it causes some earthquakes in the region. Building crucial infrastructure pieces that have not been built for 20 years, but that we all know are needed, like the links over the Pyrenees or the German power lines. I mean, there is a few things that now in this catalytic moment might be possible to do. Here, every member state needs to give something in terms of what they legally can bring to the table, high political cost, but also big benefits. Second element, we should not subsidize consumption. I mean, we are seeing all over Europe countries starting to directly subsidize consumption. And that's going to be horrible, because if we start that the rich countries essentially manage to pay their consumers to consume, they will buy up the scarce energy from the other consumers. That will kill unity in the European Union. We need a way to stop that. We need to work with the US. The US is an energy superpower. They have everything. They have coal, they have gas, they have oil, and they can do more with what they have. And they can also provide kind of certain energy intensive products to the European market. Maybe we even reduce import duties for energy intensive products like, I don't know, paper, steel, aluminium, in order to get them over and reduce gas consumption for the next 2 years. We need joint procurement. It does not make sense that the German minister goes to Qatar, and I don't know what they promised there, and a few weeks later the French minister might go there and might promise fighter planes or whatever they have in stock. That would be crazy. We need to work together on that, both on the political level, but also then on the commercial level. And here, one idea that a colleague of mine brought up that I like a lot is whether we can essentially set up an institution that does this joint procurement, but then kind of allows these volumes of gas being passed through as a displacement for existing Gazprom contracts. That might help the corresponding companies to survive the storm, and potentially might help to kind of preserve the structure of the industry in a very dangerous time. Of course, I understand all the fairness issues related to that. We need to think it through, but if we want to preserve the structure of the current energy industry, that might be a solution that then also Germany might underwrite. And maybe with joint borrowing, something that Jean might go deeper into, we can back this up financially, that also the Germans take their fair share of the cost of this exercise, of something they have a significant responsibility for. We have a big issue in terms of administrative capacities. A lot of our energy ministries nationally and on the European level are still quite quite hollowed out. We essentially outsourced all this work to companies, and now the administrative capacities are running very low. I don't know how we manage there. Maybe we should set up a sort of task force on a European level, bringing in really a lot of good people there in order to manage the process. I'm a bit worried about the quality of some of the work that is being undertaken in national and also European capital on energy policies. It's all currently happening in a very, very short period of time, and decisions that might hold for decades. Solidarity is the keyword of all of that. Solidarity between people, between sectors, between countries, between the US and us. Managing that will be crucial, and maybe we need somebody with political capital that is able also to organize exchanges of contributions to the solution over time between countries and between sectors, but something to be thought about. What I would argue is that we should try to maintain a few essential points from the old world. We should try to maintain the emission trading system over all the crisis. We should maintain energy markets, and we should try really to defend them, because we need the brains of those thousands of actors in the different companies to think about clever solutions in their individual sectors. I'm worried that if we just kind of cap everything and try to organize something top down, this will be very difficult, because I mean, our administrative capacities, as I said, are rather hollowed out at that moment. Now, with all that, you see it's going to be a a very big exercise that we are ahead of us, and we have relatively little time, but we can do it. And actually, what all this allows us is, if we manage to set it up, to also think about kind of pushing back, not only defending ourselves, but also pushing back. If we can set up a credible system of weaning ourselves of Russian energy, we can essentially introduce sanctions against Russia, not having to send them any more hundreds of millions of dollars every day to fund their war machine, to hire mercenaries, or to buy hardware from China. And so we can do that relatively quickly. The nice thing is we have storages, they are relatively full. This buys us time to get things going. So we can essentially move now. And so we have to jump, and then we have to learn to fly. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Georg. Very comprehensive overview, and also very clear and firm point. It's a monumental effort what we have in front of us, but it's possible to, if we stay united, if we activate all the, let's say, all the measures, all the possibilities, all the resources that we have. So I think it's a fairly optimistic position for which I think we're grateful, and we look forward to discussing more in the details. I just had a couple of questions for you, if you feel like taking them now. It's just a clarification. You already said, you said it very clearly that we need everything, all bullets, all the solutions we might have to contrast this big unprecedented crisis. And you also mentioned nuclear. So there are some questions whether we know that there are some, let's say, existing ideological reasons, particularly in some countries, not to bring back nuclear to the table, but how necessary do you think it is? And also how efficient, how effective can it be? Because we know that if we start building nuclear power plants now, they won't be ready before the next 10 years or so. So just a reflection from you on this.
Well, Germany, that is kind of in my focus at the moment, but there are also in other countries nuclear power plants. I mean, Belgium already decided to prolong the lifetime of their plants. Germany has switched off 3 nuclear blocks at the end of last year and is planning to switch off 3 additional nuclear blocks this year. If we keep them all alive, that would amount in terms of gas savings to about 1/5 of Nord Stream 1. Just roundabout. So it is a not insignificant contribution that can come from it, but it is by far not the silver bullet. So as I said, it's all of the above. building new nuclear power plants, I'm very skeptical that this is a good idea. I think we have cheaper, low carbon technologies in stock, and also technologies that are more quickly to roll out. But I mean, that's also not the question for today. I mean, we can discuss the role of nuclear also next year.
Excellent, thanks. And then maybe a quick question from my side. You mentioned that we need to keep energy markets working, that this is very important, not to say essential, for contrasting this crisis. Do you think the energy markets, particularly electricity and gas markets, are, let's say, already equipped to contrast at best this crisis, or do you join the current debate, which is putting the design of electricity and as a side element, the gas market also under under discussion and being reviewed?
Yeah, I guess we would need another 6-hour session to discuss.
We'll invite you to a next event.
The new electricity market design. I mean, I'm completely overwhelmed now by. I mean, we now discuss things in 5 days that we in 15 years did not find a good solution, and I'm not sure we have a good solution. I mean, the proposals that people are bringing are very partial, and as you know, the electricity market design is, I mean, Andris knows this very well, is super complicated. I mean, you have thousands of pages of network codes and so on that design these markets in a way. And if you start to play with one thing on your wholesale market, then your balancing market will explode, or your, I don't know, ancillary services market, or something on the network side. So this is, I'm very worried that we are going to make big mistakes. My gut feeling at this moment, but I have not looked deep enough into that to be really able to speak about it, is we should try to find temporary solutions to resolve distributional issues, solutions that are helping also to buffer the political cost of that. And then we should afterwards take the time to think about design questions, but in a slightly more quiet moment, because I feel that if we now throw the baby out with the bathwater, I mean, we have been working on this market designs for decades. It is by far not perfect, but I'm a bit worried that we are going to get a bit ahead of ourselves here.
Excellent, many thanks, Georg. So I think we can now close with the first intervention. And well, if there are further questions for Georg, perhaps we can take them at the end of the session. Please just specify that the question is for Georg specifically in the chat box. But I think we can now move to our second speaker, Professor Ferry, who will try to respond to a very difficult question: how to solve this energy shock, which is an energy shock. It includes all energy at all levels, and whether these the efforts that we are making right now are going to provide some changes at the macro level, particularly when it comes to sustainability policies, which were the first, let's say, the leading strategy until recently, until this big crisis started. Is it going to be the same also in the next few months, or what are the perspectives now? Have the perspectives changed? Professor Ferry, you have the floor.
Thank you. Let me start with what Georg told us. I think he was absolutely right to put the question at the level at which he put it, and thank you for that. Thank you for your word. It's really actually quite impressive to see someone of your generation telling us we're in 1940. I'd like to emphasize two things. One is the question of sanctions. We are in the EU, we are quite proud of the sanctions that have been put in place because the reaction was swift and it was effective. I think we shouldn't fool ourselves and believe that the sanctions will do the trick. What has been effective is the blocking of reserves. It has led to collapse of the ruble. It has led to significant disruption in the Russian economy. But Russia is exporting at very high prices, and therefore it is actually able to rebuild reserves. So the question we're facing is a diminished effectiveness of reserves and the risk that at some point the reserves of sanctions, and the risk that at some point the sanctions will actually have lost effectiveness. The other sanctions that have been introduced, the SWIFT and the ban on certain exports and the ban on new investment in energy, I mean, they're second order with respect to the effect of the blocking of reserves. So I think that's the big question ahead of us. The second thing I would like to emphasize is that he rightly said that we're in a mindset of avoiding the cost it could measures taken against this Russian offensive could create for our fellow citizens. I mean, I'm from a country that is in the midst of an electoral campaign, and you don't see in this electoral campaign, I mean, the reflection of what Georg said about the new world we're in. I mean, we're debating future policies, options, different candidates, as if we were in the old world. And I think that's really dangerous. Okay, this is really a sort of a snapshot on the question. On the left-hand side, on the bottom, you have the chart by Robin Brooks of the IIF, telling us about the current account surpluses of Russia. So we don't have the data for March, obviously, but we do have the data for January and February. And already in January and February, Russia recorded extremely high current account surplus, which is indicative of the fact that in stock terms, they have been hit. In flow terms, they're not being hit so far, and they are actually accumulating surpluses. On the right side, you have the exchange rate of the ruble, and you can see that after the initial collapse, it has recovered somewhat. And you have what Chancellor Olaf Scholz said yesterday in the German Bundestag. And he said, we can't afford to take further sanctions that would hit the German consumer because they would precipitate in a recession and they would destroy jobs. But basically, the question we have in front of us is that on the macro side, the policymakers, decision makers are very afraid of the potential macroeconomic consequences of an embargo on purchases of Russian gas and oil and coal also, but especially gas. And essentially that we are too dependent, and we would hurt ourselves more than we would be hurting Russia. So that's a question we have to discuss. Sorry. We're playing with Russia a sort of game of chicken. We have our vulnerabilities, we have our strengths. They have their vulnerabilities, they have their strengths. So the strengths of Russia are these high prices, the current account surpluses, and the ability to endure. I mean, a 10% drop in GDP, a 15% drop in GDP is a price Vladimir Putin is willing to pay. The weaknesses, it's the impact of the freeze of reserves and the fact that for gas they have few alternatives to the EU in terms of where they can export. We are stronger because our dependence on Russian gas is at the end of the day limited. I mean, it's very uneven across countries, but on the whole, it's relatively limited. And we have more potential for diversification of sourcing that Russia has potential for diversification of export, because they're very much reliant on the infrastructure that makes them export in the Western European market. Our main weakness is this limited ability to endure. The paradox is that heads of state and government were not shy of telling citizens you have to stay at home for a few weeks, for several weeks. But they're afraid of telling them that they shouldn't be using their car to go on weekend too far away from home. Now, what we know is that we're starting from a relatively favorable situation, though that the forecasts that were made by the OECD before the invasion. So we were speaking of growth in the euro area of 4 to 5% of GDP in 2022, and in terms of level exceeding, significantly the level reached in 2019. So we were in a sort of good outlook with the inflationary dimension we all know. And after the Omicron, the short-term indicator, the PMI, we're showing a resumption of growth in the first month of 22. So relatively strong situation to start with, but the impact of the war can be significant. So it all depends on the assumption you're making. The OECD has just published that, which is that, assuming the level of the commodity prices that was observed in the first 2 weeks after the war broke out, assuming it would stay for a year, and assuming there would be the collapse of Russian demand and a shock to spread, but a relatively moderate shock to spread, they find that the impact on growth would be minus 1.5 for the euro area, minus 1.4, and the impact of inflation would be 2 percentage points more inflation. So not insignificant, but assuming the growth momentum was strong, this is not yet a recession. Those effects are the general equilibrium effect that Georg referred to. So those are effects that come from the reaction of global market, the rise in global prices, and the impact on the euro area. There is nothing specifically linked to a sort of shortage or supply disruption. There is obviously the effect on the collapse of Russian demand on West European export, but this is fairly limited. Actually, you see that the blue part is the sort of global effect through commodity prices. The green part is a Russian effect, and you see that the green part, it's basically very limited. It's basically 0.2 percentage point. Now, the question is, what would be the implication of getting rid completely of Russian gas? And I think that the core of the discussion we must be having, because if you're telling governments it's another 2% of GDP that you're going to lose, the reaction will be very different from if you're telling them it's a few tenths of a percentage. Now, we have a brave exercise that was done by a group of German economists on the basis of a multi-sectoral model, assuming elasticities of substitution. So this is a model in which you have that's based on a research by the late Emmanuel Ferry. It combines reallocation across sectors and elasticities of substitutions between goods in order to assess what are the possibilities of substituting away Russian energy. And nevertheless, retaining a certain level of economic activity. They come out with something that's fairly optimistic with their model, which is a sort of detailed model. The impact on GDP would be 0.2, 0.3 percentage point, ignoring the demand side effect. It's a pure supply side effect. There is no general equilibrium dimension, no global equilibrium dimension, and there is no demand side dimension. But you could say that part of those effects are already taken into account in the kind of scenario that the OECD published. Now, you could play with different models, assuming that there can be, there can be less substitutability than assumed by the Bakai-Ferry model, and then you would come up with higher number. The thing that's problematic with the simulation is that they don't distinguish gas and other forms of energy because the model is not very disaggregated. So that's part of the difficulty to find out whether this is realistic. Obviously, that's it's already significant the level of disaggregation for a macro model, but for dealing with the gas issue, especially, it's more difficult. Now, some work has been done on the same basis for other countries. I can't present it because it's not published yet. But essentially, the result for the EU as a whole would be similar to the result found for Germany, but with enormous variance across countries, with really big losses for some and absolutely trivial effect for some others. So this question of European solidarity comes out very strongly from those simulations. Let me end with some questions for discussion. So I think, as I said, I think it's important to come up with a better positive assessment because it's going to be crucial in determining the attitude of the governments. I mean, if you're telling them it's 0.2 or 0.3% or 0.5% of GDP, they will have a very different attitude than if you're telling them it's 2% more of GDP, so an outright recession. The questions of methodology. So, as I said, there is this question of assessing the way in which the sort of deeper knowledge of gas markets can be incorporated into such simulations in order to get to a finer analysis of the impact. So I think that's where macroeconomists and gas market specialists should talk to each other in order to sort of narrow down the range of uncertainty. Then there are the question of how to combine the general equilibrium effect, the supply side effect, and the demand side effect. But it's a sort of probably easier. I think the core of the difficulty would be to discuss the question of how to really better represent the functioning of gas markets and the interdependence there is there. Now, there are normative instruments also. One question is the choice of an instrument, a ban, a reduction by a certain proportion, a tax. Obviously, models tell you that a tax is better because the tax, I mean, when you're using price instruments, you're essentially minimizing the disruptions by allocating essentially what would remain to where the elasticity of substitution is the lowest. Now, it may be assuming away, physical constraints. So that again comes back to the question of the methodology. But I think that's an important discussion to have from an economic standpoint. What is a preferable solution? The second question, and Georg mentioned it already, is the question of the macro effect and how they can be alleviated. At present, the energy markets, especially the electricity market, function as a sort of transmitter of inflation to a very high degree. The indexation on the marginal energy is basically a sort of an accelerator of inflationary transmission, meaning that if the central bank is forced to respond to an acceleration of inflation, especially if this acceleration starts affecting expectations, we have here something that is going to have a major macro impact. So the question of what are the instruments, what are the ways to intervene that protect the most vulnerable consumer, that do not introduce too many micro distortion, and that minimize the macro transmission, I think that's an important discussion to have. And the third, but here Georg already discussed it, is the question of European solidarity, which is obviously major in view of the dispersion there is. And so far, there hasn't been much of a display of European solidarity. I mean, we are seeing, in fact, a bit what we saw at the beginning of COVID, each country rushing, to take measures on a purely national basis. This is dangerous. This is dangerous because it's going to weaken the common response, but also it offers an opportunity for our adversaries to play one country against another, and this is really not something we should give sort of an opening to. Let me stop here.
Wonderful. Many thanks, Professor Pisani-Ferry. I think you raised very important points, extremely interesting points for discussion. These macro effects, we understood that this conflict is going to imply substantial hits to growth, have an effect on inflation that we should try to contrast somehow. And you mentioned the list of potential instruments. But you also mentioned solidarity, which is something which comes back when it comes to security of supply and energy diplomacy in a way. There are some questions regarding this in the chat, and these are probably both for you and Georg also, if you would like to respond. When it comes to solidarity, shouldn't we apply these solidarity principles that currently apply only to the European territory, also to energy community states? There's an example, for example, regarding the obligation on storage that was proposed yesterday. Why only storage on the territory of European member states is relevant? Why not also on the territory of Ukraine? And do you see a need for extending at least some of the principles of the regulation we have in place in Europe to also these other countries, solidarity arrangements, storage obligations, and so on? Would there be a benefit in your view? And would it be possible?
That's not a question for me. That's a question for the specialist.
For Georg, maybe. Yes.
On the Ukraine storage, I think Janusz Kopacz also answered to that in the chat a bit. Ukraine has huge storages, and they are technically extremely helpful and important because if we don't get Russian gas anymore, we would have to reverse the entire European gas system from west to east, which will be very difficult because it is not being built for that. So we need to get as much gas as possible into the east. So it would be not only in the interest of Ukraine, but it would really be in our own interest to kind of put essentially some stockpile of gas in the east. But of course, the situation in Ukraine is a challenging one from a commercial perspective. So that would need to be a political decision to do that and to help out there. My personal opinion would be that it would be a good idea, but I mean, West European countries are struggling to fill their storages at that time, and spending billions and billions to fill storages in a country that is partly occupied by Russian troops is not easy.
Absolutely. Many thanks, Georg. Maybe for Professor Pisani-Ferry, there is a question regarding the recent announcements regarding payment of Russian gas in rubles. With this addresses a more macroeconomic somehow, let's say, aspect of the whole crisis. I don't know if you feel to comment on this. What can be the actual intention?
I mean, it's everybody's guess what the purpose.
Yeah.
My impression is that it might be a way to tell us, if you want to get access to this gas, you have to accept to have transaction with the Central Bank of Russia, which are banned by the sanctions. So basically, putting our resolve to test. In practice, if an importer has to essentially convert the euros into rubles, pay in rubles and get the gas, I mean, it doesn't make much of a difference. The difference it has is that it has to go through the central bank. Because there is no, I mean, Russia is under capital control. So essentially, the foreign exchange market is dead. It's striking that there are still some transactions in rubles, but it's completely minor. So essentially, it means you have to go through the central bank. So I see it mostly as a political gesture, but it's still being discussed.
Yeah, and also besides that, the fact that there are long-term contracts in place that are, they are dictating many principles, and of course, the currency is also one of the elements included in the long-term contract.
Sure, there's a legal dimension to it. Yeah.
Okay, Georg, you wanted to say something?
Exactly your point. So
okay.
It's long-term contracts, so they're essentially trying to open up they are forcing Gazprom to break long-term contracts, something that they said they would never do. That's an interesting development, and certainly also a posture towards us that we are dependent on them, and probably also the statements from policymakers in Europe on how dependent we actually are have not been very, very helpful here. But maybe in the end of it all, that might be a good signal to everybody in Berlin also to wake up on to the situation that we cannot, because they start with that now. And asking us to find loopholes in our own sanctions, and then if we would agree to that, then that would show that we are feeling very insecure and very dependent, and then they can do whatever they want. I mean, they can just escalate this with the gas pressure over time. So we should really not go down that route, and the German ministry or whatever ministry should not try to find loopholes for their companies to pay in rubles.
Great. Yeah, very interesting reflections. Well, there are so many points that both of you raised that I will try to maybe pick some important points you managed and ask a general question for both. Georg, you mentioned joint procurement as one of the potential instruments to combat this crisis, this big conflict, and respond to the threats. So I was wondering if this would be, say, a first time ever. It would be a big change, a big step forward, in the way energy market forces have been working until now. So it would represent a big change. Do you think? How would you see this happening? How would you design this new system, and what effects, what difficulties, and do you see maybe the scope for a new energy diplomacy in a way, because this would change also, would have implications also on the way energy is purchased at European level, whether this was an exercise always conducted bilaterally, let's say, so far?
Yeah, my disappointing answer is I've not sorted it through, and I think I hope we all here on the call, and I mean, there are many smart people here. We should think about how to design this thing very, very quickly. I think an element could be joint borrowing to give some money to that, and an element could be this idea of potentially displacing the Gazprom contracts to kind of reduce the ripple down effects of a supply stop from Russia. But there are many things to be discussed, and I have to very openly say that in the past I was very skeptical about joint buying. My feeling was that joint buying is an entry point for endless political discussion between member states about who pays and who gets what, and side deals and corruption and what have you. So I see that there are potential risks involved in organizing governments doing this joint procurement, because I mean, the partner countries from which we buy are also, most of them are problematic countries. Only few providers are purely commercial. There is significant political dimensions to it. So I don't want to play down the challenges here. But we need to get something set up in the next 2 weeks, essentially. that is the challenge, and I can only invite everybody to start thinking and writing about how we can do that. That we have a productive debate on how to do that.
Many thanks. Yeah.
Let me follow on that. I think we're starting. I mean, this is basically what you said. We're starting from a very low base. I mean, energy security is not considered a sort of common property, a common strength of the EU, and in a way, I see it as replicating the debate we had a few years ago about the euro crisis, and with a lack of trust, a pervasive lack of trust. And the fear of the misbehavior by your partner, and the fear of transfers. So we know how bad it can go. I mean, but at the time we were surrounded by friends. We had countries around us that essentially wanted the euro to survive. It's not the situation we're facing today.
Absolutely.
Maybe one element to add. What I would hope, what I would see as a kind of a wild card in this game, might be some commitment from the US to essentially act as a catalyst in some of those things. So I mean, they have a lot of potential to help here. I mean, they can help to kind of, if they say, okay, we are committing to provide certain volumes at certain prices, however that is organized, because they are having markets, of course. But there is a political commitment to do that, to accept that Henry Hub prices go up a bit by exporting more to Europe for a temporary period at least. Then that could, but only on the condition that we get our act together. Maybe that could be one of the elements that could help us to jump over the internal difficulties that we are having.
But my understanding was that they don't have so much spare capacity, that it could be built up, and especially the level of prices will lead it to be built up. But in the short term, that they don't have much spare capacity. Is that right?
They have limited spare capacity, but they have volumes that they are selling anyway. And I mean, currently they are just taking the market rates, and the market rates that we are paying, that everybody is paying, are completely crazy. So I see that and on top of that, I mean, there is also indirect trade in gas, like trading through fertilizer, ammonia, methanol. So I think there are opportunities to bring implicitly or explicitly more energy to Europe. But my understanding is that there is a bit of, or there is a strong reluctance in the US to preserve their own economic development at the moment, ahead of the crucial elections, to not do too much. But in the long term, I mean, it's a big gain for the US. I mean, we see a complete redrawing of the global energy map here, and the redrawing of the global energy map could be very beneficial for the US if they take this opportunity. But we need to communicate that.
Many thanks. Very interesting reflection. I'm sure on these geopolitical issues we will come back in the second panel later today. But for the moment being, perhaps we can stop here. We'll have a 5 minutes break or so before the next session. And I would like really to thank very much Georg Zachmann and Professor Jean Pisani-Ferry for their very interesting intervention. Thank you very much for making the time to participate in this debate. It was extremely insightful. And so thank you very, very much. I'm sure we will keep discussing about these topics in the next weeks. Thank you very much. Thanks.
We will take it over from 2 p.m.
See you in 5 minutes.
Yeah, Georg, let me mute myself.
Hi, Alex.
Ciao, ciao. How are you, Andris?
Good, good.
Good, good, good. Just checking. I'll put this the other way around, I think. Is that better? Yeah. For some reason, I only have my mobile here. Or is it okay, Ilaria? Is it okay if I
Yes.
have it this way? Is it okay if I have it this way?
Can you
or?
come maybe a little bit closer? Can you?
Yeah, if I have to.
Sure. Good afternoon.
Hi.
We are in a break, but we will resume very soon.
Okay, okay.
We can resume even immediately.
Up to you.
Ladies, gentlemen, we restart. Where are we? We have seen that it's a big economic shock. Even not doing anything, we live in a big economic shock. And if we do something, this shock will be higher. For how long? It has been discussed. I will not enter into it. We can dream of getting US support and arranging how this US support can help us to react together. But now we have to look closer at EU itself. As you know, EU is a set of countries, and we do not every day see everything the same way. It does not matter much as long as we have common policies to address common issues. Do we have the strength to address it together? I have no idea because I'm too young. I'm only 72 years old, but I found two experts having much stronger skills to understand. One, I'm sorry, I'm not dying, I'm only coughing. One is former Prime Minister of Finland. So a Prime Minister is someone having access to particular reasoning, particular understanding of the world. And Finland, as you know, is concerned by Russia and studying Russia since decades. So very interesting to have with us Alex Stubb. And Alex presently is at EUI, the main institute like me. At EUI is a director for the School of Transnational Governance. So he's also interested in international affairs and the way the world is producing international policy, or not producing it, but simply letting the world go. And the second one is Andris Piebalgs. Andris Piebalgs had been minister in his country, Latvia, but we remember Andris for something else. He has been commissioner into the two commissions of Barroso, and presently he is prof at the Florence School of Regulation. I will ask both the same question. Where are we with the political landscape regarding Russian energy decoupling? Can we stop using Russian energy, oil, gas, coal? Are the countries ready, the public opinions ready? Or are we not ready to do that, but we are ready to increase the push? Is the climate favorable to get a real European defense policy? So 3 questions: to get rid of Russian energy, to push energy transition, to get a common defense policy. I will ask Alexander the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and maybe Norway. And if Alex is okay, a bit on traditional allies of the Nordic being Germany and the Netherlands. If you want, if you are able to. And to Andris, I will ask, of course, the Baltic countries and your neighbors. I do not know if they are your allies or not, and to be frank, I do not care much, but your neighbors being the other Eastern countries, so from Poland to Bulgaria. I will give you each 15 minutes. At 15, I'm sorry, I will have to cut you. And there is two ways of discussing separately your two speech, but I will do the opposite. I would prefer to discuss together because what is interesting is to have a European view. So I will take your both speeches for 30 minutes, and then we will discuss in the end of the hour. Are you okay?
Sure, perfect.
So we start with Alex. Alex, you have the floor.
Okay. Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Jean-Michel. And you clearly don't know Finns and Latvians. For us, I mean, to speak 15-minute sheets, it's a huge amount. I mean, we're very shy people and usually quite short. So I'll try to be short as well. I will make one general observation, and then I will make three sort of more succinct points along the lines that you suggested. I will try to take a Nordic view, but of course, you know, I come from Finland, so that's the country that I know best, and I'll try to then project that to a more sort of broader European context. Now, the first general observation I want to make in the middle of this war is that we must understand that currently there is very strong solidarity with Ukraine. There's this feeling of, you know, hate, frustration, and aggression with Russia, and you know, we are opening our borders to Ukrainian refugees, our homes to Ukrainian refugees. We're sending arms to Ukraine. You know, we're establishing President Zelensky fan clubs, and we stand united behind Ukraine against Russia. But there will be a time when this ends. If this is a long proxy war, say like the Winter War in Finland, 105 days, or the Korean War in the 1950s, or Afghanistan, I don't know. There will become a moment when Europeans don't have the same solidarity and we feeling with the Ukrainians that they have right now. So my general remark is that I think it's very important that European leaders at the moment are crystal clear in their communication about the price of war and the price of peace. And the reason I say this at this event is that it's not only about inflation, it's not only about the price of food, but it is about the price of energy. And of course, linked to that is the price of heating and electricity at home, and what you pay at the petrol station for your diesel and your petrol. So this sentiment that there has to be a clear communication that this is going to cost. It is going to be a reduction of your living standards. I mean, I love the way in which you have framed it, Jean-Michel, around and say, please, if you want to help out, reduce the temperature in your flat. Of course, for me here in Florence, it's difficult because I think the flats are bloody cold anyway. But the bottom line is that you know, we have to prepare people for this, and this is not only about the cost for us in Europe globally, but it's also about the reconstruction of Ukraine. So that's my general point. My 3 points with your question. You know, are we able to wane off of Russian energy? Are we able to do you know, energy transit or climate transit? How about defense? Well, on the first one, you know, I think we're quite lucky, or we have been wise in hindsight in Finland, that we created an energy portfolio which is diverse enough that if all of the energy production that we're dependent on coming from Russia would be turned off today, we would be able to switch to alternative energy immediately. So all of this sort of BBC rubbish about, you know, Finland is 100% dependent on Russian gas, they don't give it a context. As a matter of fact, it's 66% dependency. The other 1/3 actually comes from Estonia. But on top of that, it is roughly 5 to 7% of our energy consumption, and it's got nothing to do with homes and households. It's all about industry, and industry can switch to alternative resources immediately. Same thing goes for coal. 50% of our coal comes from Russia. So what? If it's cut off, we get it from somewhere else. Oil, 66% of our oil comes from Russia, then it's refined and resold as exports. Well, yes, the price of oil is going to go up, but the bottom line is that we can use different resources. Electricity, 10% of our electricity comes from Russia, but as a matter of fact, we already export 10% of our electricity to Estonia. Nuclear fuel, well, we have enough to fire up our nuclear power plants for a year, and if that's cut off, we can use alternative sources. And the final energy sort of dependence that we have with Russia is on wood. Very easy. I mean, you know, we have 70% of our country's forest. There's going to be some investment, but you have to do it. So the bottom line here is that Finland, and I think the other Nordic countries are quite well protected. I can't take issue with Germany because I don't know it enough. I can only read from the papers, and Jean-Michel, you know it much better than I do. You know, 40% dependency on gas, whatever that means. But to answer your question, is there a willingness and readiness to cut off Russia and the energy markets fairly quickly? The answer is yes. It's not going to be of course, it's going to be cost for Finland. It's losing already 10% of its exports because of the sanctions, et cetera, but the bottom line is that Finland is ready to do that. I actually think, correct me if I'm wrong, that this week we will probably see a decision on some kind of an oil embargo, because oil is easier to deal with than gas. Andris might correct me on this. And then at the end of the day, we're going to start seeing a waning down on oil in Europe, on gas. I mean, I think 2/3 was the target in a few months, etc., etc. Second point, transit and transition. Okay, now here's where it gets difficult, and I want to pick your brain on it. My natural inclination would be to say that Putin has done a favor to Fit for 55, and if we're really agile, it'll actually be Fit for 45. In other words, he has, with his disruptive way, helped us to make oil and gas into stranded assets at an earlier stage. But of course, we are in the meanwhile going to have to hustle and try to get some dirty energy sources in the meanwhile. But I think this will force innovation and finance into more green energy sources. Final and third point, so that I stick to my allotted time and even go a little bit under, you link this to the issue of defense. And I think it's good, but let me say one thing. I think we are already in an age of unpeace. And here I'm not only talking about conventional warfare, but I'm talking about the instruments of war being different what that used to be. It sounds a little bit paradoxical to say it in the middle of the crisis, but you see, for me, energy, technology, information, the internet, trade in terms of sanctions have already been used as instruments of war. So, to a certain extent, we're using soft elements where the European Union is very good at as instruments of war. Now, on the military side, a country like Finland, I'll put it very simply, the decision on Finnish NATO membership was taken roughly 5 o'clock in the morning on the 24th of February. That was the moment when the Russians attacked Ukraine. And we used to have 50% of the population against NATO membership and 24%. Now we have 62% in favor of NATO membership and 16% against. We never had a problem with European defense. Quite the contrary. I mean, yes, we did have some politicians who were old school, who even watered down Article 42.7, but I have always argued that we need to get security from all the possible places where we can get it. So my summary, Jean-Michel, is to say that to a certain extent, we were naive in Europe to rely on Russian gas and American security. And in the big picture, this conflict will mean that we will not anymore rely on Russian gas or energy. That will get out. And then we will probably focus even more on European security. And I can say this, Jean-Michel, to you because you have a good French sense of humor. I'm okay with strategic autonomy as long as strategic autonomy doesn't mean Danone yogurt, which of course I consume every day. Thank you very much.
Fantastic talk, Alex. Really I'm learning. I'm learning how much the Nordics are reacting, how deep they are reacting. And it does not seem fake. It does not seem only for a few days. This I understand. But to know more, I need to know from Andris, because Andris didn't have the chance you had, Alex, to be born in an independent country. Alex was born in USSR, so he may have different, he may have exactly the same. I do not know. I will know in exactly 10 seconds. Andris, the Baltic, and if you have ideas, other Eastern countries.
Yeah, well, thank you, Jean-Michel. When you came with this proposal, I basically thought that you put to me 3 questions. First, about Poland and Baltic countries always calling for a ban of importing energy products from Russia. And the question that you put is basically, can you walk the talk? The first reaction was, no, we can't. But having more detailed analysis, and I will try to show it, yes, I believe Baltic countries and Eastern European countries, yeah, are in position really to walk the talk. The second question that I felt you asked me, well, Andris, you have been energy commissioner 2004, 2010. Haven't you seen this coming? And this is sometimes that's the question that haunts me. In a way, yes, you felt insecure. And that's what we started: diversification, energy community, interconnections, renewable energy, energy efficiency. But at the same time, you felt 2 very strong arguments, at least in part of Europe, and you would never like to divide Europe. One is, well, gas supplies came also in the times of Cold War. So, and warmongering, to be accused of warmongering and risks is not very productive. So the perception was, whatever happens, well, it would not be influencing us. Strangely enough, when seeing the German minister now being in Qatar, I remember my talk with Qataris, because I also tried to get this LNG from Qatar. And then they told the story. When they started to develop LNG, first, they did not go to Asia. They came to Europe and they came to Germany. Well, they got to the deputy head of unit, at least what they say. And they said, well, are you mad? So we will get Russian gas by far cheaper. So that's why they went east instead of going west. So, but the first tendency was going to Europe. So the history shows that, well, things sometimes do not work. And there have been also some positive signs from Russia, like Chubai's electricity reform. And I am very glad that he left the country. I know that he tried to keep very low profile, but it is a sign that not everybody is Russia should be put in the same basket. Where we did a mistake, I assume we have been too technocratic, and that's the risk that Europe could start doing again. Try to look, well, it's just energy supply, we pay, we get, and then we take, well, the least costly decision. And in my opinion, things are perhaps already at that time have been different, but now it's very clearly different. The first thing is definitely moral issue: shelling, war crimes, aggression, how long you can tolerate it, and like nothing happened, business as usual. And I think that's where the pressure of people that shows the solidarity will push European leaders to take decision to ban energy products from Russia. It's unsustainable. You can't really keep it going because it's just wrong. The second is rather interesting when we talk about the costs, and is focused very much on the issue of direct costs of the contract. But Russian aggression makes a lot of refugees. Billions of euros will be needed to invest, to accommodate, to educate, to give the jobs, etc. These costs are really provided by Russians. So we pay Russians, and then we pay again for dealing with consequences of the aggression. Perhaps it's rather simplified look on it, but well, you pay double bill. So it's like if you go to a restaurant and there is something written in your bill that you never consume. So that, I think, is very serious. And when the people talk about the contracts, well, what contracts we can talk about today? Then the third is definitely the most risky thing. It's not secret, and I will come to my presentation at the end, that the Baltic states and Poland is definitely under extreme risks for two reasons. One, the public opinion in Russia is being prepared that Latvia, Estonia, and Poland are extremely hostile to Russia. They are enemies. It's a bit of a joke for that Latvia could be enemy of any country, but enemy to Russia, we know what it means. Basically, you just come in to prevent Russia to collapse. So the dangerous Russians, Latvians on the border of Russia. So that's, we are again paying for preparing war chest for the next aggression. And then there is strategic risk, highly improbable, but very easily provable. It's this issue of rubles. If you don't pay us in rubles, you will not get your gas. Wow, that's really blackmail. And we don't know, perhaps it will be implemented. In one moment, the gas stops flowing. What then we will do then? So we will make the delegation to go to Moscow to ask that it comes back. So we have so many risks, but I would say the most important risk is that we will do it anyhow. So it's better to do it in understanding the consequences you make. You can make it in different ways. Immediately, you can make very close it. You make this approach that is being suggested also in one of the questions, that yes, you pay, but it inputs in account that much money will reach Russia only when aggression will be over, when the Russian troops will withdraw. And then you could clearly say, well, okay, that's the money will flow. I doubt that Russia will ever be happy with this option, but it's not our task to make them happy. Now, why am I optimistic that when we can do this? And I will briefly go through the presentation because that's why I was more optimistic than sometimes it's being perceived that Baltic countries, and Alex also very made this point for Finland, that they are so exposed or not exposed at all. And if you see Poland, well, Poland imports quite a lot of fuel from Russia. So they will be definitely exposed, but they are also diversified. So they understand this. It's not that only Germany has such a problem. Poland, Latvia, Lithuania has the same. Where it is consumed, it's again on Polish economy. Most of it is industry. And our industrial developments be anyhow under the threat. We needed to change the model to green technologies. So it's again the situations that are very similar to Germany. Lithuania will be the same. Latvia will be slightly different. But if you see, it's not such a speculative. And then now we see, has some countries taken Russian threats seriously? Yes, you see. Lithuania, Poland, even France has decreased. Well, not too much, perhaps not so for strategic consideration. But if you see Germany, it's basically on the same level. Italy, the same. So, and Netherlands quite have started it because of the fields. So they have been developments that diversify, and this interconnector, Baltic connector between Estonia and Finland actually allows to provide the security of supply from from Klaipėda terminal. I'm also optimistic. This is Lithuanian electricity supply by source, and you would see what's this yellow one, what that it is. Lithuania had a huge nuclear power station, Chernobyl type, and they closed it down. And there was expectations that it will be darkness. No, Lithuanians did well, and they managed really to evolve quite well. Then there is also a story about renewable energy. I took to only here highlight Lithuania, but the main power growth have been in renewable electricity. So they installed the windmills. When they closed the as power stations, there was a gas, but they did it. Then there is something of European solidarity. If you see these interconnectors, when I started work, it was only Estlink 1. I came for inauguration. Since then, there have been links with Poland, with Sweden, now this Harmony link for synchronizations. It's impressive. It's really impressive. That made that island is not any more island, and synchronization will go forward. Yes, it brought new situation for Baltic states. If you see what is produced in Latvia and what is imported, well, energy flows where it's cheaper. So that's why you have such a amount of imports. So some people say we would need more capacities to produce. That's why this ideas about nuclear power station whatsoever. But that demonstrates that market works very well and supplies Baltics. There is some drawbacks probably, but generally it's sound. Now look in Lithuania. So imports since Klaipėda FSR has been changed dramatically. Yes, Russian gas is there, but it goes also to Latvia from the imports of LNG, and there is diversification. So basically, with the storage of inch accounts, Russia is not anymore game changer in Baltic and Finnish market now. But where the risks are, and that's look on the left, and that's where I really believe we need to put these things in context. So it was Levada Center asked in 2021 where the enemies are. Yeah, Ukraine, you find it very high. Well, US is definitely number one. UK is also not favorable. But then you see Poland and Latvia and Lithuania. Oh, Estonia, I'm sorry, was not in this. But what threat we can really provide? And that, I think, where you can clearly see the targeting. And I believe not so much on French side we should. And now, do Baltic countries and Poland is sometimes understood correctly? Because this perception of danger is always therein. So as a result, when you try to develop European defense capacities, you try to do it in a way that you feel not more unsecure. And here you clearly see that spendings. Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Lithuania, by far higher military spendings than Slovak Republic, Hungary, and Czech Republic. It's not because these countries don't want to protect, and they're also NATO members, but you can clearly see which countries feel more dangerous. And I believe on this European defense, and I'm positive also what Alex was saying, that it's not anymore a problem really to develop this European capacity. You need just to do it seriously. It needs to be done in proper way that each step in European defense is not weakening the current position of countries that most exposed and most at risk. And I would finish with what Georg told in the first panel. It really requires in Europe incredible focus, because what happened in Baltics and also in Poland with energy transition was very much supported by the Commission. It allowed things to happen faster. European budget helped really to overcome financing difficulties. And if you have an administrative capacity and financial resources, you could very much smoothen the downsides of cutting off supplies from Russia. But there is no alternative. It should be done as to faster, as to better. And yeah, there is no other, unfortunately, option. Would be the second option. I would be happy to tell. There is none. And at this stage, we could not expect that any such option will come in next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. So we need to do it fast.
Many thanks, Andris. So many similarities between the Baltics and the Nordics. Alex, would you comment what Andris said? And Andris, would you compare to what Alex said to see if you feel the same or if you are discovering nuances?
No, I mean, not that much to comment. Also, I had forgotten that I was actually Prime Minister, I think, when we did the Estlink with Taavi Roivas. So now with hindsight, that was a pretty smart move to get the things going. But I think basically the narrative that Andris is putting forward is to say that, you know, we can actually manage this. We can salvage this. There might be some hiccups on the way, but actually it looks quite okay. I really like the way in which he framed the idea of the double payment. Actually, you know, on one hand, we're paying for the cost of the refugees, and on the other hand, we're paying the gas. And you see, what I want to say here is to say that, you know, I talk a lot with business as well, and I'm sure we have some businesses online here today. Now, I think the hypothesis that they need to work with is to understand that Russia will become fully isolated. And by that, I mean to say that it will be isolated politically, economically, financially, sports, culture, transport, and at the end of the day, also on energy. So, you know, if you are a Western company at the moment working in Russia, obviously you have commitments to workers, et cetera, but it's going to be impossible for these companies to stay in Russia. I'm not going to start giving super examples, but for instance, you know, we have a big company, energy company called Fortum in Finland that has a lot of assets in Russia. And of course, what they're doing a balancing act with at the moment is to provide the energy and heating for X million of households, and that is their commitment. But I am sure that at their headquarters in Espoo, outside of Helsinki, they're making very close calculations of what the ultimate cost is going to be and what the rundowns are going to be. So my message is that I think we can take the energy hit on oil and gas, but it will have obviously a price.
Thank you, Alex. Any reaction on this? After that, I will ask Georg and Jean.
Well, I didn't find anything that is contradictory what how Alex said. I think it is, but I would just enlarge this what Alex said about the citizens and corporate sector. Basically, Russian exports of oil are falling down, not because governments have taken action. It's corporate sectors and citizens have taken action. In Poland, the trade is being blocked by citizens on the road. People stay there because they don't understand how you try to keep businesses normal in the situation where war crimes are being committed. So I think this is very, very important aspect, and this somehow is less understood, I think, by governments, because people are solid, has clearly where they are. So it's not a question. There could be perhaps some who would like to, but it is nearly all the people. But governments are trying to make things more sophisticated, and that I think is wrong and even not acceptable.
Georg, Jean, questions, comments, questions, if you want to know more about the countries Alex and Andris quoted, or if you want to discuss particular aspects of the past policies. Jean?
Yeah, I mean, very very reassuring, very strong commitment. My question is, how do you explain why countries that have a lesser dependency on Russian gas have such a different attitude? We're seeing the difficult debate in Germany. I was quoting Chancellor Scholz yesterday in Bundestag saying we can't afford to have a recession, and that would be worse than continuing with the situation we're in. We don't want to do ourselves more harm than the harm we're doing to Putin. That's basically the line he's taking. And we can look at different countries. So the map of political attitudes does not coincide at all with the map of energy dependency. What's your explanation for it?
Well, I think about Germany is very good op-ed now, I think in today's Politico, where Chief Executive Officer of Axel Springer says, to tyrants like Vladimir Putin, restraint is only an invitation to escalate further. I think it is just German political thinking evolvement in it. So they somehow evolved immensely. I think people, German people, but on political levels, they still try to find this magic hook that will somehow bring things back together. I assume that more south, again, I remember this manifestation in Florence. The people are demonstrating, governments are trying a bit more influence with traditional customers of Gazprom. And that's why this European platform sounds so good if it's rightly made, because traditional customers of Gazprom definitely does not support the war, but they have business. And then they lobby the government saying, well, if it will not be, it will be the end. And it's not true. It will not be the end. And that's why also I so much praise Brueghel's work, because they published so early the paper with figures. You can manage. Yes, it's challenging. No question about it. Yes, it's cost, but it's not such a disaster. And Jean, you also today put economic figures. I think that's a really good approach, really to have modeling. It's not perfect. You can always, but it is scientific method, and that definitely gives overall impression just to avoid that things are bad. I would give bad example from my country. We have had a discussion at some stage with Lithuania because Lithuanians would not like to buy electricity from Belarus because of unsafe new power station. So instead, buying point now is on Latvian border. And the argument was used that if you don't buy, and it was coming from the electricity sector, this power from Russia, Riga will be in darkness. And I publicly said, it's nonsense. It's not, it's completely irrational. Why they did say it? In supporting some traders, I assume that's the only thing it is. It's not logical, it's a lot of perception. And I think on governments, and electricity sector is always very complicated. They just trust what is being said, and they don't ask the second expert or third expert. So on gas, it's more simple, but again, you trust too much saying everything will collapse, industry will stop. But anyhow, industry is stopping because of the war, because of high oil and gas prices and coal prices. So we need to have different model. We can't compete with Saudis if they would like to make ammonia on basis of the fossil fuels. We perhaps can compete if we make on the basis of renewable energy.
If I can give you my
Alex,
2
please.
cents.
Alex,
to Jean. I guess my first observation is a personal one. You know, having been in office for 8 years and now being here enjoying life in Florence on the other side of the fence, it's always a hell of a lot easier to have freedom rather than responsibility. So when you're in the middle of taking those difficult decisions, it's a balancing act. When you're outside of those decisions, you can take the moral high ground and make an argument that this is what should be done. So I'm mindful of that. It's so easy for me now that I even participated in my first ever demonstration, actually here in Florence, the one that Andris was referring to for Ukraine. But my point on Germany is very simple. I think there are 2 reasons, Sean, that Germany is finding this so difficult. One is these remnants and nostalgia for Ostpolitik, you know, and it's a kind way of saying, I guess, you know, appeasement towards Russia. And I can say this because I'm a Finn, and the reverse of Ostpolitik is Finlandization, which was actually invented by a German professor in 1966. So there is this sense that, you know, you feel that, well, we should be able to cooperate with Russia. And I think that's what drove us in the post, you know, communist or post-Cold War era as well. And where I think it goes too far is the likes of Schröder working for Gazprom. But where it didn't go too far was this attempt of having Russia integrated into the West. Well, now that we have failed, it's impossible to do that. And that's why I'm saying that, you know, the era is over and regime change will take time. But the second colossal mistake that Germany did, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but was, of course, Energiewende. You know, this sort of illusion that you can cut down on nuclear power just because of course, horrific accident happening in Fukushima. It was too fast, too soon, without serious consideration. And that is the main reason for why I think Germany is between a rock and a hard place at the moment. I may add to this, and sorry, I don't mean to offend anyone, but had we human beings been wise with hindsight and thought about developing nuclear technology in the 1970s, instead of shooting down that technology, life would be looking a hell of a lot easier at the moment. Just wanted to say that, couldn't resist.
Anybody willing to comment on this or to move the discussion to something else?
Maybe a few words on Germany. I mean, I think what I learned from the whole exercise is that sort of mental models that are making us feel good are most likely wrong. And I think that this mental model of the Ostpolitik and this Wandel durch Handel and kind of that, I mean, it all sounded so nice. They are dependent on us. We are dependent on them. What could possibly go wrong? And I mean, we told us this story here in Berlin over and over again and dived deeper and deeper into this dependency. And I think it should be a message to everybody to kind of think about those mental models that makes us feel well, but there's a high risk that they are not correct. On the challenges in Germany, I think there is, for me, I see it as a devil's pact. I mean, it is really, we obtain energy very, very cheaply. Last year, the average price posted by the customs for Russian energy, for Russian gas was something like 17 euros per megawatt hour. So somebody is making a lot of money. We have built in a continent that is energy poor. And in a country that is very energy poor, we used to have lignite and coal, but that has gone, and oil didn't replace it. And nuclear was, for several reasons, not chosen. I also think because of cost. Then we built in such a country still an energy-intensive industry. We have a steel industry, an aluminium industry, a very strong chemical industry, and that kind of completely contrasts the laws of economics. I mean, if David Ricardo were to be alive, he would be shaking his eyes or whatever. But I mean, this stuff shouldn't be produced here in Europe to that degree that is being produced. The rents have been used in the political system. The rents have been used to buy in the trade unions. I think there is a history to be written about this nexus that has built up in Germany. I think the Energiewende especially the buildup of renewables is the right thing to do. What we have been doing is bringing down the cost of the technology. I think in 10 years down the road, we will be out of this problem because, I mean, the German plan published last year was to get 85% renewables in the power system by 2030, which is a crazy number. And now they want to even speed it up. I mean, if they're going to get there, we really only have a problem of the next 2 winters or so to survive, and then we are through with the problem. But in the process, we might have to reconsider some of our industrial strategy in Europe, whether it really makes sense to import energy, which is difficult to import because transporting liquefied natural gas is expensive, transporting hydrogen is even more expensive, or whether we rather think more about importing intermediate products that are highly energy intensive, such as steel or ammonia or methanol. And if we go down that road, we might still keep very much of our high value added, high capital intensive, highly human capital intensive industry that provides a lot of GDP while reducing our exposure to these global energy prices. Thank you.
So you have a lot of ideas, Georg, very interesting. But I forgot to participate into the discussion. I was only taking notes. Anybody else willing to ask a totally different question or to take it through another aspects? Because I have something in mind for Jean. Jean, in a former discussion or a former paper, this I cannot remember, you convinced me that green macro is not rosy, it's only green. And the sympathetic view of saying that not only we will have energy transition, but also a lot of jobs, but also good wages, but also this, but also that, might be true after 2050, but before 2050, maybe green macro will be something else. And why am I asking you this question? Because we are in an oil shock or an energy shock. How could we put on this shock, as violent as it is, another strong push to energy transition, if energy transition is not to deliver rosy macro immediately, but only later? How will it work?
It's what Georg was saying at the beginning. It's a major shock. I mean, part of the capital stock we've built, it just has no value, especially Nord Stream 2. It's just an example of more of the capital stock that has lost value and that must be replaced. So we have to struggle, and I agree with what Georg was saying. We have to sort of prolong the life of the part of the existing capital stock that can help build a transition and accelerate the move to a greener economy. That means more investment. That means less room for consumption. So that means a difficult transition in which we are poor and we've got to invest.
I catch the message, but Alex and Andris, how will citizens buy it? We are not only saying that the shock with Russia is a shock, and nevertheless it's a shock, and we cannot change it. But we are also saying that the way to get rid of Russia is demanding other efforts. How will it be accepted?
I think it was Georg and also Jean, I think, mentioned response to COVID. I think that's definitely similar. I would say Ukraine shelling is worse than COVID actually was or is. So as I have my family member now having COVID, and so that's why I'm saying is. But it was a response from governments, and people really accepted because they knew that needs to be done in majority interest, and not everybody was happy. And in this respect, I wanted Jean-Michel mentioned Baltic states, that there is 1/3 very clearly not very much supportive. It is the rate of vaccination. It's rather interesting. Was Lithuanians have been the best, 72% roughly, Latvians 70%, and Estonians 64%. Actually, I was quite happy that Estonians are below us, but I would happy that we would be 92, 90, and 89. But it will never be accepted by whole society. But if governments take the lead, today they have enormous leverage. And additional moments that I believe in this COVID strategy, and as usually I could say, and now not being in government did a lot of things too late and not enough, but basically they have been sound and they learned how to live through the crisis, and they have not lost him for the next elections, neither in any of the Baltic states, and I assume also neither in Poland, because the response by majority was understood as correct. And there is minority that makes a noise, that will protest. There will be anti-vaxxers, there will be anti-energy change, but this will be minority. And there is, well, state has a power. If somebody makes too much trouble, he or she is in trouble as well.
So I will summarize it. Oh, I will give you the floor, Alex.
Okay, no, just very briefly to say that, you know, I'm with Andris on this. And I come back to my original point about explaining and communicating the price and the cost of this war. It will be extremely complicated to do. There are a lot of people who are saying that, look, now right-wing populism has been wiped off the floor of European public discourse. I say, not so fast. It's going to come back. It's going to come back when energy prices go up. It's going to come back when food prices go up. And it's going to come back with the refugee crisis. And there is this interesting correlation. There is this interesting correlation that you have to keep in mind. And that is that you do have the active anti-vaxxers who were usually pro-Putinists, and they probably will react to the post-Putin era in a quite predictable way.
Okay, Alex, but nevertheless, what you are saying with Andris is that we have Winston Churchill promising tears and blood, and Greta Thunberg promising green constraint. That's the political program.
That's when realism hits idealism, I'm afraid.
Okay. Anybody else willing to take it in a different way? And last aspect, the European policy itself. On this, Andris, you know a lot. Alex too, because Alex, before being a politician, was also a brilliant researcher at the internal think tank at European Commission. He does not know that I know, because Alex is a friend of a friend. I won't tell the name of this friend. So how do you see the production of European policies in this context?
I think Alex is better placed than I do, because he's by far more closer than I am. Alex.
Okay.
Alex.
Well, yeah, brief answer than this. I still keep on repeating this. You know, I'm an institutional nerd. I fully admit that. But I keep on repeating that the European Union makes policy and advances through crisis. And usually it goes in three phases. Phase number one is crisis, phase number two is chaos, and phase number three is suboptimal solution or suboptimal policy. And it's a reality that we have to live with, that we don't live in sort of la-la land or utopia of perfect European policy making. It's always going to be an imperfect solution. Jean will be the first one to tell you that what we did with the ESM, what we did with banking union, and everything that followed in the aftermath of the euro crisis was suboptimal. Someone else will say what we did with the first asylum crisis was suboptimal. Someone else will say that what we did with COVID was suboptimal. The only thing I don't buy is that what we did now with the war was suboptimal. I actually think this time around we had the crisis, we skipped the chaos, and then we ended up getting a fairly optimal solution. What will this mean in terms of policies in the future? It's impossible to say, but I would argue, at least in the short term, when we have the war in Ukraine in the back of our minds, and when we have an understanding that energy prices are going up, and especially on fossil fuels, I think it should be actually easier, and sorry for being an idealist, easier to drive through some of the disruptive change and moves away from fossil fuels than what it was before. But to try to find that balancing act, all I say is good luck, Ursula von der Leyen, and good luck, Franz Timmermans.
Okay, I will take it as granted. Ladies,
Can I maybe
gentlemen,
follow
please,
up
Georg, please.
on that?
Jean-Michel, I'm
Okay.
sorry to be to interrupt this very interesting debate. I feel it could go on forever, but we are already 10 minutes ahead beyond schedule. So I think
In my mind, it was to end at 3 p.m.
2:45. Yeah.
Okay, so
that.
Georg, you have 15 seconds.
I just wanted to follow up on Alex's good point that of these three stages, and my takeaway from that would be maybe on the energy side, we should jump and we should see how that we get into the situation that we have to deal with the challenges ahead of us, because otherwise we are not going to get all the momentum being put in place to come to a solution. We will be like the frogs in the boiling water that not do anything. So let's just do it and cut our dependency on Russian energy for now, and give us the political room for maneuver to help to co-design the future of Europe.
Excellent.
I'd like to add, no, there is a lot of complacency, Alex, not from you, but in general in the European debate. The belief that sanctions have been very effective and that we've done what we had to do. It's true, but it's not sufficient, and this situation may evolve in the wrong direction.
So we will resume this debate the 12th of April in the morning with 4 practitioners telling how to manage disconnection with Russian energy. Not to see it as a policy, but to see it as a practical implementation case. 12th of April in the morning. However, I have to add that it's one of the most interesting and exciting discussions I have attended for years. And it shows that in Europe, we can discuss things. Europe is not something, not putting issues, options on the table. It's not true. That's the opposite. Issues, options are on the table. And all of us, the audience, you can participate into this discussion. Georg, Alex, Ilaria, Jean and Andris, congrats, and see you later.